I remember the exact moment I died. Not the way people say they remember where they were when they heard terrible news. I remember it in my bones. In the back of my skull where the cold blade rested before it twisted. In the taste of iron and roses that filled my mouth as I fell. It was my wedding night. The kingdom had celebrated for 3 days. I had worn a gown of silver and pearl, so heavy it took 4 maids to lift the train. They called me the people's queen before I had even spoken my vows. The crown prince, my husband, held my hand and smiled at me with eyes the color of winter sea. I thought I was the luckiest woman alive. I was a fool. The ceremony took place in the grand cathedral of Ether, under a ceiling painted with angels and falling stars. Every noble house in the realm sent a representative. Foreign princes brought gifts of spice and silk. The high priest bound our hands with a golden cord and declared us one flesh, one blood, one throne. That night, alone in the royal chambers, he poured 2 glasses of wine. Dark red, almost black. The same wine they had toasted with at the feast. He handed me one and said, "To us." I drank without hesitation. The poison didn't taste like anything at first. It was sweet, like burnt sugar. Then it hit my stomach, and something inside me screamed before my voice could. My knees buckled. The glass shattered on the marble floor. I looked up at him, my husband, my king, and he was still smiling. "You were never meant to rule," he said. Those were the last words I heard before the blade. He drew a dagger from his belt, the ceremonial one I had given him as a wedding gift, and drove it into my heart. One clean thrust. He'd practiced. I remember thinking, absurdly, that his form was perfect. I died on the floor of my bridal chamber, drowning in my own blood, while my husband stepped over my body and walked out to meet his mistress. Her name was Serafini. I learned that later, in the place between worlds. She was the daughter of a minor baron, a woman I had never even noticed at court. They had planned it for months. My kingdom, my title, my lands, all of it would pass to him, and she would rule at his side as the new queen. I was just a stepping stone, a transaction. The last thing I felt was rage. Not sadness. Not fear. Pure, white-hot rage. It burned through the poison, through the blood loss, through the cold creeping up my limbs. I refused to close my eyes. I stared at the door he had walked through and I swore, with whatever was left of my soul, that I would find a way back. And then I died. Darkness. Not the darkness of sleep. A vast, endless void where time didn't exist. I was nothing and everywhere. I could feel my memories dissolving like sugar in water. The faces of my parents, who died when I was young. The scent of the garden where I played as a child. The sound of my own name. Then, light. A needle of white light, impossibly far away, growing larger. Rushing toward me. A sound like 1,000 bells ringing all at once. Heat, but not the heat of fire, the heat of a heartbeat. My heartbeat. I gasped. It flooded into my lungs so violently that I choked. I was on my back, staring at a ceiling I knew. Wooden beams, painted with faded stars. The same ceiling I had stared at every night from age 10 to 17. My childhood bedroom. My hands flew to my chest. No wound. No blood. No wedding gown. I was wearing a simple linen nightdress. My fingers touched skin that was smooth, unbroken, and smaller than I remembered. I threw off the blankets and stumbled to the mirror in the corner of the room. It was an old thing, warped at the edges, but it showed me the truth. I was young. 17. Maybe 16. My face was softer, the cheekbones less sharp, the eyes missing the weight that years of ruling had pressed into them. No scar on my temple from the assassination attempt when I was 22. No lines around my mouth from 1,000 forced smiles at court. It was real. I was back. I don't know how long I stood there, gripping the edges of that mirror, trembling. My mind raced. I didn't understand the magic, and I didn't care. All that mattered was the date. I grabbed a candle and ran to my study, bare feet slapping cold stone, and threw open my old diary. The pages crackled. Ink, faded but readable. My handwriting, round and hopeful. The last entry was dated the eve of my 17th birthday. I counted backward, then forward, heart pounding. If this was real, if I was truly back in time, then the prince had not yet arrived at my family's estate. He had not yet proposed. He had not yet met the girl he would one day slaughter on her wedding night. And Serafini, the woman he loved, was still an innocent baron's daughter, unknown to me, probably writing love letters in her little countryside manor, dreaming of a future she would steal from my corpse. I closed the diary. I didn't cry. I had shed all my tears on the marble floor of that bridal chamber. Now, there was only one thing left inside me: purpose. The sun rose that morning over the rolling hills of my ancestral lands, and with it rose a new queen. A dead queen. A queen who knew every secret the kingdom would hold for the next 7 years. Every betrayal. Every war. Every weakness. I stood at my window and watched the light touch the forest, the river, the distant towers of the palace where I would one day die. And I made a decision. I would go back to that palace. I would meet my killer again. But this time, I would be the one holding the knife. The first step was the engagement. In my previous life, the Crown Prince had arrived at our estate 3 days after my 17th birthday. He came with a full retinue of knights and a letter from the king himself, requesting an alliance between our houses. My uncle, who was my guardian after my parents died, had accepted without hesitation. I was paraded before the prince like a prize mare, and I had blushed and curtsied and thought it was destiny. Now I knew the truth. The prince needed my family's military support to secure his claim to the throne. He would say whatever words were necessary. He would make whatever promises. And then, once the crown was on his head and my army was loyal to him, he would dispose of me. Not this time. On the second day of my new life, I began to prepare. I didn't tell anyone what had happened. Not my uncle, not the servants, not my closest friend Lady Alara. They would think I'd lost my mind. Instead, I became a ghost in my own house. I listened. I watched. I gathered information. I remembered the names of the nobles who had betrayed me. The ones who had stood by while the prince executed my supporters. The ones who had whispered against me at court, calling me a foreigner, an upstart. They were all walking around right now, alive and arrogant, unaware that I had a list in my head with every single one of their names. But revenge is not a blunt instrument. It is a blade that must be sharpened slowly. If I acted too quickly, I would be discovered. If I changed too much, the future I knew would shift beyond recognition, and my advantage would be lost. I had to be patient, cold, strategic. The prince would arrive in 1 week. In my old life, I had worn a blue gown and stammered through dinner. In this life, I would wear armor beneath my dress and lace my words with poison he couldn't taste. One night before his arrival, I did something I had never done in my past life. I went down to the family crypt. The crypt was cold and smelled of old stone and dried flowers. My parents' tombs stood side by side, their stone effigies holding hands for eternity. I knelt before them, not as a grieving daughter, but as a queen seeking counsel from the dead. I will avenge more than myself, I whispered. I will restore our name. I will tear down the house that destroyed me, and I will make sure no one ever uses our blood as a stepping stone again. The silence that followed felt like approval. On the 7th day, the prince's banners appeared on the horizon, blue and gold, fluttering against the grey autumn sky. I watched from the highest tower as the procession wound its way up the hill. Knights in polished armor, a carriage draped in royal silk, outriders with horns announcing his arrival. My heart beat faster, not from fear, from anticipation. I was about to meet my murderer face to face, and I would smile at him, curtsy, and call him Your Highness as if he were a god. He would have no idea that the girl before him had already died once, that she carried the memory of his blade in her chest like a secret second heart. He would fall in love with me again. I would make sure of it, because his love was the weapon I would use to destroy him. I descended the tower stairs with my head high and my hands steady. At the bottom, my uncle waited, red-faced and nervous, adjusting his ceremonial sash. "Remember, child," he said, squeezing my arm too tightly. "The prince is our future. Be gracious. Be obedient." I smiled. "I will be everything he desires, uncle. I promise." He didn't understand the double meaning. He never did. The great doors opened, and there he stood. Prince Aldrich of House Vila. Tall, golden-haired, with those same winter-sea eyes I had stared into as I died. He was younger now, 20, not yet 27. The lines of cruelty were not yet etched into his face. He looked almost kind. I hated him with every fibre of my being. "Lady Evangeline," he said, taking my hand and pressing his lips to my knuckles. His voice was smooth as oil. "I have heard much of your beauty. The rumours do you no justice." In my old life, I had blushed and looked at the floor. In this life, I met his eyes and held them. "Rumours are often incomplete, Your Highness," I said. "I look forward to showing you the full picture." Something flickered in his gaze. Surprise. Intrigue. The first hook, set. That night, at the welcome banquet, I did not sit silent and demure. I sat at the long table and listened to every conversation. I noted which lords the prince favoured, which topics made his smile tighten. I answered his questions with grace but never gave him the satisfaction of easy agreement. When he tested me with a political question about the eastern border disputes, I gave him an answer that was just slightly more informed than he expected. "You seem unusually well-read on matters of state," he said, twirling his wineglass. "I had excellent tutors," I replied, "and a great deal of time." Time for what? I smiled over the rim of my own glass. Time to understand that knowledge is the only crown that cannot be stolen. He laughed, but his eyes didn't laugh. They watched me carefully, reassessing. I could see the gears turning in his mind. She's clever. She could be useful. She could be trouble. I was counting on all three. After the banquet, I excused myself early, pleading fatigue. As I walked through the torchlit corridors, I heard footsteps behind me. Light, quick. A woman's steps. I turned a corner and waited in the shadows until she passed. A serving girl, carrying a tray of empty goblets. She had a plain face, brown hair pulled back, and a small birthmark on her left cheekbone. I knew her face. I had seen it in my dying moments, briefly, through a crack in the door, as she handed the prince a fresh dagger just before he entered our chamber. Her name was Myra. She was Serafini's childhood maid, planted in my household weeks before the wedding. A spy, and she had just started working in our kitchens 3 days ago. I let her pass. I didn't confront her. Not yet. Spies, like wounds, are best left open until you can pour salt on them. Back in my room, I locked the door and sat at my desk. I took out a fresh sheet of parchment and began to write. Not a diary entry. A plan. The plan. Phase 1. Win the prince's affection. Become the perfect future bride. Learn his secrets, his fears, his weaknesses. Phase 2. Identify his network. Serafini, the spy Myra, the nobles who support him. Map the web before I cut a single strand. Phase 3. Build my own power. Allies I can trust, money hidden from the crown's accountants, evidence that will destroy him when the time is right. Phase 4. On our wedding night, the same night he killed me in my past life, I will not be the one who dies. I stared at those words until the candle burned low. Then I folded the parchment and held it over the flame. It caught slowly, curling into ash that floated onto the stone floor like black snow. Ash. Crown of ashes. I smiled. The next morning, a messenger arrived with an invitation from the prince. He requested the pleasure of my company for a private walk in the gardens that afternoon. The game had begun. I dressed carefully. A gown of deep green, the colour of pine forests, nothing like the pale blues and pinks I had worn as a girl. My hair was pulled back in a simple braid, but I wore a single ornament, a silver pin shaped like a thorned rose. My mother's pin. In my old life, I had never worn it because it felt too sharp, too aggressive. Now it felt perfect. The gardens were beautiful in autumn. The leaves had turned gold and crimson, and the air smelled of earth and the last fading roses. The prince waited by the fountain, dressed in a dark riding coat. He looked like a painting. A beautiful, poisonous painting. "Lady Evangeline," he said, offering his arm. "Thank you for indulging me." "I am at your highness's disposal," I said, taking his arm. My fingers rested lightly on his sleeve. I could feel the muscle beneath the fabric, the same arm that had held me down while I bled. We walked. He talked. About the weather, the countryside, his journey. Small talk, but I listened to every word, filing away details. He mentioned a childhood accident that left a scar on his right shoulder. I hadn't known that. A weakness, perhaps. He mentioned a dislike for dogs. A dog had bitten him as a child. Another note. Then he turned the conversation toward me. "You are not what I expected," he said. What did you expect? A girl. Shy, eager to please. A blank page.
There are moments when a woman realizes she has two choices: remain a victim, or become something far more dangerous. I chose the second. If you're still here, it means you understand what's coming. You know I'm not going to stop. You know every smile I give him is a trap. And you know episode 2 will take us closer to the fire. Press subscribe now. Turn on the notification bell. Because I don't forget who stood beside me when I was still building my throne. Now, watch me make him fall in love with the knife.
He stopped walking and faced me. You are not a blank page at all. You're a book written in a language I don't yet understand. I let a slow smile touch my lips. Perhaps your highness simply hasn't learned to read it yet. He stared at me for a long moment. Then he laughed, a genuine laugh, surprised out of him. You are dangerous, Lady Evangeline. Am I? Dangerous people are the only ones worth knowing. He took a step closer. I think you and I will be very good friends. I tilted my head. Friends, your highness. Or something more. His hand came up, and he brushed a stray hair from my cheek. His fingers were warm. The same fingers that had closed around a poisoned wine glass and passed it to me. I didn't flinch. I let his touch linger. Then I stepped back, just enough to remind him that I was not his to touch whenever he pleased. Something more, I echoed softly. That would be a great honor. But I must confess, I am wary of honors I have not earned. Then earn them, he said. I intend to. That evening, I dined with him again. And again the next day, and the next. Within a week, the court was buzzing with rumors. The prince was smitten with the young lady Evangeline. My uncle was ecstatic. I played my role perfectly, the blushing bride-to-be in public, the sharp-tongued strategist in private. The prince began to confide in me. Small things at first, his frustrations with his father the king, his boredom with court life, his desire to be a ruler unlike any the kingdom had ever seen. I absorbed it all like a blade absorbing heat in a forge. On the 10th day of his visit, he made his proposal. It was sunset, on the same balcony where, in my old life, he had knelt and offered me a ring of sapphire and diamond. The same balcony. The same words. Lady Evangeline, I am asking you to be my wife, to stand beside me as the future queen of this realm. I looked at the ring. It glittered in the fading light, as cold and perfect as I remembered. In my old life, I had cried and said yes before he finished speaking. In this life, I paused. I let the silence stretch until I saw the first flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. Then I said, very quietly, I will marry you on one condition. His brow furrowed. What condition? You will never lie to me. Whatever we face, whatever darkness comes, you will tell me the truth. I would rather hear a painful truth from your lips than a sweet lie. I knew he couldn't keep that promise. I knew he would break it 1,000 times before our wedding day. But I wanted to see the lie form in his throat and watch him swallow it. His face softened into a mask of sincerity. I swear it, Evangeline. I will never lie to you. I smiled, and let him slide the ring onto my finger. The metal was cold. A perfect fit. Then I accept, I said. He pulled me into an embrace, and over his shoulder, I stared at the horizon. The sun was bleeding into the night. Somewhere out there, Serafini was waiting for him. The spy Myra was cleaning dishes in our kitchen. The noble conspirators were dreaming of the power they would gain through my marriage. And I was dreaming of the moment I would burn it all to the ground. That night, alone in my room, I stood before the mirror again. The engagement ring gleamed on my hand. The girl in the reflection was not the girl who had died. She was harder, sharper. The weight of a future not yet lived sat on her shoulders like an invisible crown. I raised my hand and touched the cold glass. This time, I whispered to myself, to the dead queen I used to be, to the kingdom that had buried me without a tear. This time, I will be the one standing when the last sword falls. The reflection seemed to nod. And somewhere, in the deepest part of the night, a clock began to tick. A clock only I could hear. Counting down the days, the hours, the minutes until my wedding night. Until the night I would rewrite history with fire and blood. Until the night I would claim my crown of ashes.